Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our Jubilee School session. We are doing another great night of Jubilee School in our College for All series, which has been running for several months now. It's going to run through the summer. The aim of Jubilee School is it's our one of our political education arms of the Debt Collective. We've been at this for a long time. We're trying to change the ways that people think about debt, feel about debt, capitalism, racial capitalism, colonialism, patriarchy, etc. And this semester for Jubilee School, we're focusing on the push for free universal college along with debt cancellation. But one of the things that we've been emphasizing, and it was included in some of the promotion for tonight's talk, was that universities should be free for everybody, but they should be freeing as well. In other words, we do not want to have universities that reproduce some of the ugly aspects of the racial capitalist imperialist state. We definitely don't want to have universities that are free but still investing in massive war and other forms of atrocities that we're all familiar. Well, I mean, we're not familiar with. We're going to learn about tonight. And so a big part of the series is to talk about how we not only win free college and debt cancellation, but also how we recreate and rethink what the university is, how it works, who governs it, and what are we studying. So this talk tonight is a big part of that. We're going to have a great example of an amazing campaign from our comrade and co-founder of the Debt Collective, Hannah. I'm going to let Julia say a few things about Hannah, and then I'll add a couple things, and then we'll turn it over to Hannah herself. So Julia, go for it.
Thanks. I'm excited to be able to introduce Hannah. I'm Julia Barnard. I lead the higher ed team here at the Debt Collective, and I'm very excited to introduce tonight's conversation. Hannah is not only a co-founder of the Debt Collective, but also a professor at UCLA in economic anthropology, interested in transnational capitalism and finance. I pulled up your bio, and it's so amazing. I knew it, but the words in it are amazing also. And Hannah has two books and is working on a third, I believe. The first is The Licit Life of Capitalism, an account of a specific project, U.S. oil companies working off the shores of Equatorial Guinea, and a theorization of more general forms and processes that facilitate capitalist projects around the world. And the second book is a debt collective book that I hope everybody's seen. And if they haven't, you should absolutely check out, which is called Can't Pay, Won't Pay. Um, I put the link in the chat, The Case for Economic Disobedience and Debt Abolition, with a forward by Astra, also here tonight, the other co-founder. So, um, VIP night tonight. And we're so happy you're here, Hannah. Thank you so much for doing this talk. I think this talk has actually come up on prior Jubilee schools, in reference to things that faculty and faculty unions can kind of organize around, as we move towards the big goal of free college. There are many things we can do on the road. And this is a really awesome step on the road that has been successful, I think, in your case. Um, and I know it has inspired other faculty unions because it's come up multiple times in these conversations. So I guess that's it. And Jason, if you have any more to say, you can say
Yeah,
it. But otherwise, I'm very excited to hear from you.
just really quick word. Hannah has been for a long time one of my teachers. I've learned so much from Hannah. Not only about how to fight against debt, but just how to survive in this world we're in, and particularly in the academy. So it's a real honor to have Hannah as one of our speakers in this series. Um, the other thing I'll say is the format for tonight is really meant to be dialogical in so far as Hannah's going to present some ideas and some analysis and some work. And then we'll have a moment for pause for a question and discussion. And then Hannah's going to give us some more specific aspects of the tactics and other things, practices used in the Move Mirror Money campaign. We'll have another time to end with some more questions and discussion. But I think Hannah would be more than okay with like if people come up with something and they want to say, hey, wait, can you ask to talk about that or slow down or clarify, then um, by all means, put your name or anything in the chat or raise a hand, and I'll call on you, and we can do that. So, without further ado, we're going to turn it over to Hannah, and thanks again.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks, Jason and Julia, for that generous introduction. And thanks so much, folks, for coming. I do think that tonight's Jubilee School is going to feel a little bit lateral to a lot of what we sometimes talk about at the Debt Collective, because I'm actually going to be talking about kind of from the weeds of a specific campaign that's not a debt collective campaign, but is a campaign to divest the UC pension fund from state violence. So, but it is both related to our broader work at the Debt Collective in some ways that Jason shared about free college being not only free, but freeing. And it's also related to our work at the Debt Collective in some other ways that I'll share. And it's widely relevant across higher education. While the details I give will be specific to the UC system, I'm very eager to talk about how this is applicable elsewhere, and not only across higher education, but across any entity that has a pension fund or an endowment or uses index funds. And if your eyes just glazed over when I said index funds, hopefully after this presentation, you won't feel that way anymore. But you can find out more about the campaign at our extraordinarily, if a website can be analog, ours is because it's made by like a bunch of nerdy faculty with free Gmail tools. But anyway, ucmoveyourmoney.org. And if you follow us on Instagram, there's actually some really cool little videos of different UC professors, including some luminaries, right? Dylan Rodriguez is up there, Wendy Brown is up there talking about why they moved their money. And it's helpful even for people to pay attention to it so that other folks might draw their attention who haven't heard about it yet. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get started just with an overview of what I'm going to do. And Jason, I'm not going to monitor the chat, so if you want to interrupt me at any point, just let me know. So I'm going to start with a little bit of context about divestment and the Debt Collective, because as I said, divestment is not what the Debt Collective does on a daily basis. So I'm going to try to put it in the context of our work at the Debt Collective. And then I'm going to tell you a little bit of the background of this campaign that you would need to know, a little bit of a summary of it. And then I'm going to give you the details of what is a three-step escalating campaign. And that's where I'm going to first stop for questions. And then after our first kind of set of Q&A, I'm going to show you, I'm actually not going to show the folks here in the room how to take step one, move your money, but this is the tactic. This is the next thing that we show UC workers. And it's actually not just faculty, it is also staff. So I'm going to kind of show you what we show them. And then we can talk a little bit about our progress. I love that Julia said we are successful or that we have won. That is definitely not true, but we have a plan and we're on the road and we've come up against a lot of roadblocks. And I know folks in the room are organizers, so you know about that, and I want to talk about that too. And then we'll have more time for questions and discussion. So that's the kind of roadmap of where I'm going to go today. Okay, so a little bit of context. What do you do when your university is complicit in state violence? So this is obviously a photograph from the UCLA Palestine Solidarity Encampment. And it is my effort, this next couple slides is my effort to try to put into dialogue what divestment campaigns look like in the context of what I would call, or what I kind of embody, right? What all of us embody as a debt collective analysis or a debt collective narrative. So first kind of orienting question. What do you do when your university is complicit in state violence? What do you do when much, though not all, of that complicity is financial? And we can talk about multiple forms of complicity of universities in state violence if we want during the Q&A. I invite you to write that down and save that question for the Q&A. I am going to be talking primarily about financial complicity tonight. So what do you do when much, though not all of that complicity is financial? And then I just want us to notice that Palestine solidarity demands on universities were often demands on financial investments, right? So you see my kind of added, what do you call this, like call out box there, the kind of classic encampment chant, disclose, divest. We will not stop, we will not rest, disclose, divest, we will not stop, we will not rest. So what is that asking for? Disclosure of financial investments, right? And divestment from those investments that are complicit in the genocide in Gaza, right? That's what that demand is asking for. And if you actually look at some of the signage, you see some, not all, financial demands, right? So people over profit. There are a bunch of kind of signs that have to do with BlackRock and Blackstone. So this is coming from my employer, right? UCLA, series of questions about university complicity and state violence. And here is kind of a debt collective, I would argue, answer to that question, right? But with more questions. So I feel like one of the things that we ask at the debt collective is what kind of organized power is possible within and against financialization? And we at the Debt Collective answer that in a repeating and I think extraordinarily strong way. And that answer is debtors unions. And if folks want to talk about debtors unions on this call or during the Q&A, I'm happy to talk about that, but that's not actually my topic today, right? But debtors unions are one kind of organized power that is possible within and against financialization. But any kind of organized power against finance requires disobedient financial literacy. And I would argue that this is something that we do a lot of at the Debt Collective. So financial literacy, to use an overused word these days, but is often weaponized against debtors, right? Oh, it was because you weren't financially literate, and that's why you have all that student debt or all of that medical debt. In other words, we are pathologized individually as debtors and told that we just didn't know enough or understand enough. And so sometimes in kind of more radical circles, people can be like, so fuck financial literacy. It's all about organizing. Fine. But we actually need radical and disobedient financial literacy in order to answer that first question. What kind of organized power is possible within and against financialization? So, because what we want to build within financialization is organized collective action where we have leverage, right? That's what debtors unions try to do. That is also, as I will present tonight, what I would argue divestment campaigns must try to do. They have to go through a process of radical and disobedient financial literacy, right? Understanding the finances of their institution, something Jason on this call and many others have spent a lot of blood, sweat, and tears on and continue to organize around so that we can find the kind of organized collective action where we have leverage. So now this brings me to my employer. The UC system has a particular kind of leverage in financial markets, and that is scale. The UC system is enormous in ways that I'm about to share with you. And pensioners within the UC system, which is most workers, not all workers, and we can talk about that, but it is most workers, have potential power over that pool of money, right? So these are not debtors. These are people whose retirement is invested in the UC pension. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that scale now. Okay, so these are the top 7 largest national economies on the planet. You will notice that number 4 is not a nation. Number 4 is the state of California, where I was born and raised and where I continue to work. California is the 4th largest national economy on the planet. California is enormous. Within California, the University of California is the state's largest employer. We have 10 campuses, we have 5 medical centers, and we have 3 national laboratories. So in a state, which is in fact one of the largest economies on the planet, my employer is the largest employer in that state, right? So this is to try to give you a sense of the strategic scale at which the UC system operates in higher education in general, and arguably, in ways I'm about to share, divestment in particular. So more specifically, UC Retirement Savings Plan, which is a particular part of our pension, and it's the part that I'm going to be talking about tonight, is the second largest public defined contribution plan in the United States, right? So we are talking about an actor, the University of California system, and the pensioners within it, that's me, I am a worker at the University of California. We have a tremendous amount of potential power. But because we are organizers, we know that just because we have structural power does not mean that we can actualize it or leverage it or flex it. That's what takes a tremendous amount of organizing. And that is what the UC Move Your Money campaign is trying to do. So I'm going to get to that. But this is the last kind of introductory slide. To give you a sense, the University of California system has $180 billion of assets under management. You might ask, and rightly so, why on earth, if we have almost $200 billion in assets under management, are we driving all of our students into debt every day? And it would be an excellent question, right? We have $180 billion of assets under management, and we have several people, including folks in this room, that middle book, Lend and Rule, Fighting the Shadow of Financialization of Public Universities, written by our own, co-authored by our own Jason Wozniak. Many books have dealt with this issue. And there's kind of a famous and somewhat silly, but somewhat not silly quote that I think nicely summarizes this moment of the financialized university. It's most often said about Harvard, but I would argue that it applies to the University of California too. The UC is a hedge fund with a university attached. If that is what universities are in this day and age, as Julia said in the beginning, and we want collective power to be able to transform that, a project that is getting more and more urgent by the day, how do we get power over the financial arm of the university? That is what UC Move Your Money is trying to do. Okay, so that's my kind of like linking it to debt collective work and why I think it's broadly relevant to what we do at the debt collective. What I'm going to transition into now, and now I want you to imagine yourself as a worker in the University of California system. You have a sprawling employer with 10 huge campuses, tons of hospitals, big research centers all across this huge state. I want you to imagine yourself as one of those workers coming to these presentations that we often do on Zoom, or if we can get invited to faculty meetings or union organizing meetings. This is the presentation, only slightly tweaked, that I give to them, right? So I want you to imagine yourself as a worker in the UC system. That could be a faculty member, that could be a staff member, that could be a graduate student, a unionized graduate student. Okay, so here we are. The goal of UC Move Your Money is to build and exercise shared governance over our pensions. Shared governance is a particular kind of phrase in higher education that I'm happy to talk about. By divesting our retirement funds from industries and companies that facilitate state violence. This includes military aggression and occupation, prisons, border security regimes, apartheid, and genocide. And we want you, good workers of the UC system, but truly everybody out there, and that's the extension that we'll talk about, we want you to join us. So, who are we and why are we doing this? In other words, what's the group of people who started this? If you go to ucmoveyourmoney.org and you click on About Us, you'll see the names of several tenured faculty members, including me. We are many of the research group that started this, right? That did the kind of radical and disobedient financial literacy research necessary to get this up off the ground. But there are many much more contingent, much more vulnerable junior faculty member and staff members whose names are not on that website. And we can also talk about the risk of these kinds of actions as well. So that's a little bit about who we are, but perhaps I think more relevant, why are we doing this? So we believe that divestment from state violence is an ethical obligation. So over the last year, here in Los Angeles, here in California, but across, of course, across the country in various ways, we have watched the escalation of state violence, both at home and abroad, as the Trump administration has sent masked ICE agents to kidnap our neighbors, build concentration camps for immigrant detainees, and uses domestic military deployments to impose policies of mass criminalization. As genocide, occupation, and apartheid have continued from Palestine to Sudan and beyond, many of those forces terrorizing our neighbors and terrorizing innocent civilians use surveillance technology and weapons from companies funded by our pensions. So just to give you one concrete example, and I'll give you more as I go on, in May 2024, UC disclosed that our investment portfolio holds $3.3 billion from groups with ties to weapons manufacturers, 3.3 billion. Looking just at the component of the UC retirement system that I'm going to focus on tonight, $70 million are invested in GE Aerospace. If you are concerned about bombs being dropped over Iran, if you are concerned about bombs being dropped over Lebanon, if you are concerned about bombs being dropped over Palestine, GE Aerospace supplies the engines for military aircraft through one of the major investment index funds that we're invested in to the tune of $70 million. So our campaign seeks divestment from companies that arm and equip regimes of border terror, surveillance, incarceration, apartheid, and genocide. And we do it for reason one, right? Our comfort in retirement is invested in state violence. That means that we are complicit, very literally. But we also have the power to change that if we organize. So that's the first reason we've done that. We've engaged in this campaign that I'm about to share with you. But there's a second reason. And this reason is very important to our broader work at the Debt Collective and our broader, just any work that's going on in higher education right now. We have to build and insist on new kinds of, faculty power in the face of attacks on higher education. So Trump's assaults on public higher education have obviously placed an existential threat on the core values of the public mission of any public school, let alone private. But folks on this call know, well before those attacks, Faculty in the UC system have seen the increasing centralization of power in what we call in the UC system the regions. I hear there's a fantastic author of a fantastic book that analyzes these power structures, but increasing centralization of power and increasing disregard for faculty voice and governance. And so just to give you a kind of specific example, one of the sites of that centralization of power into an unaccountable group has been in decisions around investments and investment income. So UC investments have grown by as much as $6 billion over the last 12 months. This is the Regents Blue and Gold pool from a year before. It was set up as a rainy day fund that campuses should be able to draw on in times of emergency. In 2024, you see that it grew at an astounding 151% rate, increasing by $4 billion. And yet all we hear in the University of California is, oh, the administration is taking our grants, and oh, austerity, and oh, you can't hire anyone, and oh, you can't do research anymore. And yet, if we do that disobedient radical financial literacy, we see that there are extraordinary pools of money that aren't being drawn on this particular rainy day, right? So with a very big shout out to our recently revivified Council of UC Faculty Associations, faculty currently have no governance, as in zero governance over how this half of the university, which is to say its investment wing, runs. There's this thing in the UC system. It's somewhat specific to the UC system. I'm happy to talk about it in Q&A. It's called shared governance. Shared governance in the faculty senate, which I also sit on, so I can talk to you about it, takes the form only of advisory and not formal authority over budgets and compensation, and that includes our pensions. So part of what this campaign is doing is demanding and using our ability to move our money out of unethical sources in order to build that new kind of power alongside our faculty associations that have been on the front lines of fighting back against the current attacks on higher ed. Shout out to AAUP folks in the House, to Vina Dupal, but the UC Faculty Association, which I'm also a member of, has been the ones with AAUP and others launching the lawsuits against the Trump administration with this much help from our administration, quite literally. So we can refuse what the university has become, which is an investment entity sectioned off from democratic governance. And instead, or in order to do that, we need to organize around new kinds of faculty power. So those are the two reasons that we have undertaken this campaign. They are complementary. And now I'm going to get into the really fun stuff like pension funds and the difference between a defined contribution plan. But I really hope that I can make it exciting and approachable for you so that you can get a sense of, for us, what disobedient radical financial literacy in the UC's own finances has looked like. Okay, so here you go. It's a pretty good visual, UC's own visual, I might add, of our investment assets, the UC. It's divided into three large pools. So what I want you to look at, it's not to scale. UC retirement is by far the biggest pool of invested assets. Remember before I was like $180 billion of assets under investment. Here's a picture of what they all are. So we are focused on retirement because that's where workers, faculty and staff in particular, have strategic leverage, right? It is our pensions. But our campaign complements student-led divestment campaigns that often focus on the endowment, which is to say the orange circle, right? So again, these strategic questions: who has leverage, who has complicity, who has both empirical but also ethical demands to make, and where? You have to start getting familiar with the finances of your university to be able to make an argument about that. I, again, am going to be focusing on the retirement piece because we are talking about a faculty and staff run and led campaign. Okay, so I'm going to focus in on that green piece. So what I want you to notice are the two yellow rectangles at the bottom. On the left, you see it just says pension, right? This is a traditional defined benefit pension plan. It pays out benefits by a formula that uses our age, our past salary, our years of service. It's increasingly going away as newer and newer faculty and staff are hired. Fewer of them have access to this left-hand rectangle. And the funds in the pension, that $103.2 billion, are invested solely at the discretion of the UC regents. In other words, we have no kind of easy access to demand where that $103 billion is spent. However, in the rectangle on the right, you see the UCRSP, or the Retirement Savings Plan. This is the one that I told you is the second largest public retirement savings plan in the entire country, right? This is something a little different. This is not left-hand rectangle defined benefit. right-hand rectangle defined contribution plans. So what does that mean? Here, retirement comes from individual accounts that are built up through the UC and employee contributions over time. And individual workers get to choose how these accounts are invested based on a menu of options that the UC provides. And basically all faculty, if you look at FAQ number 1 on our website, you can see how this is allocated. But basically all faculty and most staff have some UC RSP investments. So there are two things that I want you to hold on to from this slide. Retirement funds account for 77% of UC assets under management, right? People say, oh, the university is financialized. Well, what do they mean? They often mean the pension. This is one of the largest public pensions on the planet. 77% of UC assets under management are in this fund. This, we would argue, gives faculty and staff, in other words, workers with pensions, leverage. Second takeaway from this slide, retirement savings, that right-hand rectangle is based on individual choice using UC developed funds. And that is central to the strategy that we have come up with and are pursuing. So as I said, it's a 3-step campaign. This slide is going to give you a super quick overview, and then I'm going to give you a couple details on each of the steps and how they build on one another and escalate toward a broader win that we can't win, we believe, in step 1. And then I'm going to pause for Q&A. So step 1 is move your money now. Again, I'm going to say more about each of these in a minute. Step 2 is to build a new no state violence fund. So we need to win each of these steps in ways that I will explain in order to take to the next step. And then step 3 is go national. So I'm going to explain each of those steps. So you don't have to keep this slide in mind, but right, I'm going to talk about number 1 right now. Move your money now. Oops, let me go. Okay. Shout out to Abigail Boggs, who just joined from the Abolition University Collective. Hi, so cool that you're here. Okay, so step 1, where we are right now. And in fact, Nick Mitchell, one of Abigail Boggs' collaborators, gave a recent Jubilee school, but also is one of the UC Santa Cruz organizers for this. Okay, so step 1, move your money now. We can each, if we are a worker in the UC system, do this immediately. Let me say it again. We can do it immediately. We aim to get 10% of faculty, and we can talk about why that specifies faculty if you're interested in the Q&A when it's actually all workers. Get 10% of faculty to direct 10% of their UC retirement savings toward the already existing UC Social Equity Fund. So remember, I'm talking about that right-hand rectangle. See it up in the top right corner? On the UCRSP fund menu, remember, it sounds hella abstract and there's lots of acronyms, but just look at that yellow rectangle, right? There already exists something called the UC Social Equity Fund. It's a US stock index fund that screens out companies based on something you've probably heard of. It's called ESG for short, environmental, social, and governance criteria. These criteria already exclude military weapons manufacturers from the fund. So why is step 1 worth doing? There are 3 reasons. Oh my God, please work thing. Okay. The Social Equity Fund, and I'm going to show you some details about this on the next slide, is substantively better in terms of state violence generally and weapons manufacturing specifically than the other retirement savings fund into which all of us are otherwise invested by default. So for example, I gave you that GE Aerospace example, right? Who is dropping the bombs on Iran, Lebanon, and Palestine? Well, the engines for those aircrafts are built by GE Aerospace. We have I think I said it was $7 billion invested in GE Aerospace. If you take step 1, you divest from GE Aerospace. So that's one reason. Second reason, UC Chief Investment Officer Jagdeep Singh Bachar has actually cited low participation in the Social Equity Fund as evidence that UC workers are not interested in divestment, that they like to shout it at encampments, but in practice, they are not interested. So winning step 1 will prove him wrong, which will also help us build the case and build the power for step 2. Because if we can get 10% of faculty and other workers, again, I'm happy to answer that slippage in the Q&A if you're interested, to move our money, that initial 10% provides a base of faculty power to exercise in winning step 2. And again, to all my organizers out there, just because people did it doesn't mean we have organized a base. So in the second part of this presentation where we talk about tactics and strategy, we're going to talk about how we're building that base. Okay, so let's look just a little bit at what happens when you take step 1. Some details on both the benefits and the limitations, the very real limitations of step 1. So on the left, You see some of the companies that we are all invested in by default, right? So as soon as we get a UCRSP account, when we become workers at the UC system, we are invested in all of these left-hand companies by default in what's called the UC Domestic Equity Fund. That's the largest component of the Pathways funds. And unless employees actively make a change, we are invested in all of those companies. So if you look at the middle column where it says you see social equity and you see some green checks and you see some red X's, the red X's are the companies that are excluded when you take step one and move your money into social equity. So Caterpillar, if you know, you know, GE Aerospace, right? Raytheon, Walmart, and the involvement, the far right column is why they are screened out. What environmental, social, and governance criteria, what ESG criteria screens. So to us, what this graph shows is that step one is a major improvement, but we need a way better option to be more fully divested from state violence, right? Palantir is there. I will talk about them in a moment. Amazon is there. Google is there. I will talk about them in a moment. Sorry, Alphabet is there. Okay, so that burning need for a better option is what takes us to step two, right? So we win step one in order to move on the escalating campaign to step two. So step two, get that same 10% of faculty, or ideally more, to demand a new index fund that is more robustly screened for the many forms that state violence takes and the resources it uses. So when we look beyond weapons manufacturers, the biggest state violence complicit funds are big tech. Shout out to Astor Taylor and Naomi Klein's book coming out in the fall. Okay. Microsoft, Google, and Amazon are complicit in Israeli human rights violations. They have also been accused of aiding and abetting forced child labor in cobalt mines in the Congo. And of course, these same tech companies are deeply complicit in the data and surveillance infrastructure of US incarceration and border policing. And UCRSPs, right, this component of the retirement I'm talking about, their largest fund, we have 80 million invested in Palantir, for example. And UC Social Equity still includes all of these companies. So divesting from these firms is not just a matter of conscientious objection. And to be quite frank, given the way the stock market and bond market, but stock market is going right now, there are very few people out there who would say, I will forego my comfort in retirements just to divest from Google. So we should talk about that. But this is what we're thinking about in step two. Rather, we see step two as a tactic to pressure companies to change their behavior or risk losing investments from one of the most powerful public retirement systems in the United States. In other words, we are not simply divesting, but using that enormous scale, that market-making power that I introduced at the beginning to pressure companies, right, with collaborations with No Tech for Apartheid, with collaborations from folks at these big tech companies who are increasingly unionizing, to force them to decouple, to cut some of their contracts, lest they lose the massive investment of the UC system. So the No State Violence Fund demanded in step two would screen out companies complicit in state violence broadly conceived. So this would include not only Palantir, but something we've been hearing about quite a bit these days as Trump just named this dude to his cabinet or to head ICE. This includes not only Palantir, but also Citizens Financial Group, right? That bank that has been heavily invested in US private prisons for a long time, including the Geo Group, which is now the kind of main and extraordinarily newly wealthy builder of ICE detention facilities, as well as Axon Enterprises, a major supplier of so-called less lethal weapons that give technologies to US police forces. So this broader lens, right, the No State Violence Fund, builds on recent divestment work that is focused on Palestine, which remains included here, but it's situated within a broader set of commitments. And that's why we call it No State Violence. And I'm going to talk about that strategic decision in a moment. Okay, so because we come to Debt Collective political education sessions or are members of unions or are members of the Debt Collective because we believe in organizing. And if we believe in organizing, we understand the importance of strategy. I am going to introduce you to some of the strategic features of this campaign. Why are we doing it? How we're doing it? First, a lot of divestment campaigns have focused on direct investments in individual firms. The University of California holds stock in Palantir. The University of California holds stock in Caterpillar. However, major institutional investors, including the University of California system, have actually moved away from direct investment. That's why you see the arrow on the slide, moved away from direct investment toward index funds, to the extent that when our Palestine Solidarity Encampment made the disclose, divest demand, Jagdeep Singh Bachar, who I introduced you to before, said, oh, we're already divested from all of those companies. So he's basically like gaslighting them because he's talking about direct investments. So he can say, we're actually just invested in the UC Pathways 2050 index fund, but it holds all of those stocks, right? So these major institutional investors have moved away from direct investments toward index funds, making it much more difficult to figure out what they are investing in. So that's one strategic feature of this campaign. Most divestment work has also focused on the big institutional investment of the largest asset pools, right? So like the endowment or that defined benefit pension plan. Remember the left-hand rectangle, that bigger rectangle. Our choice to focus on the right-hand rectangle, the defined contribution plan, helps overcome some challenges, including kind of Palestine exception regulations. The UC is divested from South Africa, the UC is divested from Sudan. But when it came to Palestine, we were told that we could not divest, right? We can talk about that particular kind of hypocrisy in a moment. So our focus on the defined contribution plan helps to overcome some challenges in pursuing institution-wide divestment. And it also actually tracks the growth of defined contribution plans. This is like the 401k in the private sector, because these are actually steadily eclipsing defined benefit plans in the UC and nationally. So when we focus on that right-hand rectangle, that defined contribution plan, and the index funds in which they are generally invested, it has some distinctive features. First, workers choose where to invest our retirement savings. That blunts some of the perennial and now tired objections to divestment. One hand, fiduciary responsibility, but it's my responsibility to maximize your profit in retirement, right? That objection. Or political diversity within the institution, of which UCLA has quite a bit, and I'm happy to talk about that as well. At the same time, by highlighting individual faculty decisions with immediate, tangible consequences, we create space for faculty agency and responsibility that can spur organizing. And for anybody who has ever known a faculty member at the university, I would argue that we like to talk a lot about political agency and responsibility, but don't generally like to do anything more than talk about it. When we get to the tactics of this campaign, I will tell you how much of a choke point that has in fact been. But we also have our eyes, and this is the final slide, on a larger strategic payoff that takes us to step 3 of the campaign. Having won the creation of the new No State Violence Index Fund, into which UC workers can direct our retirement savings in step 2, then we would work to extend the no state violence option beyond the UC system, creating an actionable divestment demand across higher ed retirement plans and beyond. So smaller institutions lack the power, they lack the scale, they lack the clout to shape the investment vehicles available to them, right? That menu from which investors choose. But the UC's enormous scale, with which I started, gives us leverage to reshape the landscape. So if we win step 2 and are able to create a no state violence index fund, that then becomes what's called an off-the-shelf option for any institution that has an endowment. For any institution that has a pension worldwide, index funds are commodities that can be used anywhere. Index funds know no state boundaries, they know no national boundaries, right? It's an off-the-shelf global commodity. So the new No State Violence Fund, importantly, could also be used in that defined contribution side, the bigger left-hand rectangle, right? We don't yet have an index fund that looks like this to make that demand of the UC regents. We need to get it built, and we need to build the base to demand that in order then to start moving toward the much bigger rectangle, right, which is that defined benefit pension plan. And as I said, any museum, any institution with an endowment, anything with a defined benefit pension plan, nothing limits it to higher ed, right? Any institution. So it leverages our power as workers in one of the largest retirement systems in the UC to advance a broader common good. And so I'm going to stop there with a kind of background overview, and I'm going to come back and find all of you for the first set of questions. And then the second, I'm not going to go back to my slides, really. I'll just kind of tell you about how we've been trying to do this and how challenging it's been. Although just shout out again to Julia, who was like, "Yeah, you've already won, right?" So I love the optimism, but I'll talk to you about the challenge, the tactics we've been using and the challenges that we've been facing.
Hannah, if you stop the screen share, we can have a
Oh yeah, sorry.
Brady Bunch. Okay, here we go.
Yes.
That was incredible. Totally blown away by this. My goodness. Where do we begin? So I think we have a question from
Oh, good.
Bruce.
I love this. Bruce, can I answer Bruce's question?
Yeah, go
Oh,
for it.
Thomas, of
But
course.
maybe
Thomas
we
is
should
like,
read it out loud too, so everybody
yes,
Or
of course
have
I
why
will.
don't Bruce, do you want to ask it and then Hannah can respond?
Good thing. So I've heard these arguments that most ESG funds have lower returns and or higher fees. I've also been in a board of trustees meeting where somebody said that the SUNY investment strategies are not and should not be based on political criteria. Um, have you been hearing these kinds of arguments, and how have you been responding to them?
Oh, my friend, I have a slide for you. Because yes, this is often the first objection that we hear. So let me just make this bigger. Um, okay. So to Bruce's question of like, oh, they have lower returns, they have higher fees. So one thing that we always say that's not on this slide is there are absolutely zero taxes or fees for moving your money around UC retirement savings, and that is generally the case in defined contribution plans. But to this other question, will moving my money in step one, let me be very clear, will moving my money into the social equity fund risk my retirement security, which is a question about return on investment, right? So we have a couple answers to this question. You will have noticed that our step one ask is just to move 10% or more of your UC retirement savings. We are not asking you to move all of it. So why is that? That 10% works with common asset allocations. Okay, our eyes are glazing over. What the fuck is a common asset allocation? We also have some law professors who we've been working with on this. And at this moment, they're always like, we do not have the professional background to be giving you financial advice, except, and they're like, you always have to say that. So there you go. However, what is a common asset allocation? Basically, common investing advice says that you need to invest, in a blend of stocks and bonds. Stocks tend to be higher risk and higher reward, whereas bonds tend to be a more stable but lower return. So the idea is and you can see here, this is for folks who are supposed to retire in about 6 years. This is one of those default funds that I shared with you. So for folks who are supposed to retire in about 4 years, wow, I just did some weird math, 4 years, you'll see that both of the different blue colors are stocks. So it's still majority in stocks, but the yellow are bonds. And the idea is that as you get closer to retirement, you want more, slightly more of a balance of bonds to stocks. Because again, that's just kind of stabilizing the pool that you have managed to save. Um, and UC social equity is entirely stocks, right? It is entirely US stocks. There are no bonds in this particular index fund. That said, the UC social equity has performed as well as otherwise similar UC domestic equity funds. And these are the UC's own numbers. So you see social equity in green being compared to the domestic equity, which is the default below it. And it has actually had a higher return on investment year over year than domestic equity. So while we cannot predict the future, that's another thing my law school colleagues make me say, and of course it's true, right? UC social equity has actually had a significantly higher, statistically significant higher return on investment. But now to this crowd, why is that? The answer is big tech, right? The answer is not a great ethical answer. The answer is that Palantir makes a shit ton of money and Google makes a shit ton of money and Amazon makes a shit ton of money and Geo Group makes a shit ton of money. And so that's why step two is going to be so tricky and actually about building the kind of power to ask them to decouple their kind of most nefarious contracts. So that's a whole nother can of worms that we plan to spend the summer dealing with. That's a partial answer.
Fantastic. And Hannah, I'm wondering if like if someone wanted to reproduce this project on their campus, right? I am curious, without naming names or anything like that, to go backwards in time and just say like, how the hell did you guys figure this out? Like,
Yeah. So
yeah.
to be honest, it's not that hard. And I mean, not that it's not that hard. I don't mean to say that, but I guess I feel like the basic parameters will work almost anywhere. So most campuses have TIAA. And basically what you need to figure out is there are a couple steps. This is kind of what I was going to talk about in the second part, but I'm happy to talk about it now. So look at your investments, right? Most of this is published online. If it's not published online, it's totally reasonable to ask for it and see where they're pooled. In other words, see how much do you have in the endowment, how much do you have in the pension. Once you find the pension, see if you have both defined benefit and defined contribution. Most places do. Then defined contribution plans are generally managed by, they're subcontracted, right? So for us, it's Fidelity Net Benefits. For lots of other folks, it's TIAA. So you want to find out what is the menu of defined contribution plans that you have, and is there something like a social equity fund on the menu? Thomas is pointing out in the chat, there's lots of funds that have divested from oil, not that long ago historically, but ESG funds in general, if it's following ESG criteria, it is divested from weapons manufacturers and oil and some other human rights abuses, as you saw on slide one. So what we're arguing is that even though that is a deeply imperfect step, and trust me, academics love to like one up us on this step all the time, and they're like, but what about Palantir? And I'm like, come to the presentation, motherfucker. Sorry, there's some angst at my colleagues. But what that does is but we don't work for Fidelity, right? You don't work for TIAA. So if folks just go and move their money, but you are not base building, then you're losing it. So what we have, if folks go to ucmoveyourmoney.org, on the very front page of our website, we have an attestation form that takes about 15 seconds to fill out. And it says, I moved my money, and here's an email address for me, and here is why I did it. So we are building a list, and we also have a recorded version of this presentation online. We're going to all of these faculty meetings wherever anybody might take us. You can imagine where we've been invited and where we haven't been invited. And we build warm lists. I mean, we're actually organizing. We have weekly meetings. We follow up with people who we see have watched the presentation online but haven't moved their money. We have big lunches. I've put a lot of my research budget into like hosting lunches to teach people about this in the name of financial literacy, knowing your pension. We're trying to collaborate with the faculty association. So you have to build that list in order then to have a community with whom to both research but flex for step two, because otherwise we would have no idea, right? A tree would fall in the forest and we would have no idea. But if we can go to Jagdeep and be like, 10% of us, thousands of us have moved our money, and this is our demand, and this is the research paper behind it that was published in a fancy peer-reviewed journal, then we start to flex the power.
Yeah, wow. Brilliant.
In
Really.
theory, in
Yeah,
theory.
no. But you're doing it. You're doing it.
Mm, we
I
can talk
mean,
about that too.
okay, well, it seems to be happening. Does anyone have any other questions they want to ask before we move on to the next part? Really, yeah, it's so inspiring here.
Yeah, it's also because all of you guys are like my friends here. Thanks, Dr. Bell. It's nice to see you.
Well, I mean, there's other people too, but okay.
Okay. So
Go for it.
I'm just going to share my screen for a hot second again, because I'm just going to show you. So the only other thing that kind of I wanted to talk about is, so how do we do it, right? What does this look like? And Jason's question just answered a bit of that, but the biggest hurdle that we have found, and I would love to spend some time with folks on this call who are not a simple random sample, but like thinking this through and troubleshooting this a little bit is, so what people have to do to take step one is log in to their Fidelity Net Benefits account and move their money, move 10%. For folks who are younger, it tends to be, and I do not count myself in this, right? Like I'm almost 50 years old. It tends to be that for faculty members who are younger and have spent a lot of time in online interfaces, sometimes around finance, sometimes not, but are deeply comfortable in online interfaces. And for many of the folks in professional schools, so medical school, business school, law school, folks in general who are less afraid of their finances and maybe even more invested in like having a really big retirement fund, which some of us who are critical of finance often kind of balk at that kind of thinking, are comfortable logging into Fidelity Net Benefits. But we have found, for reasons that will not be a surprise to the student debtors amongst us, Shamal, you and I have talked about this so many times, and Thomas has helped me, Thomas Goki on this call has helped me with this so many times. It's frightening to look into your own finances, right? Especially if you've never done it before, especially if it's in an online interface, especially if everything you hear at work is about austerity. And so what we do tactically is we walk people through via screen share how to go to Fidelity Net Benefits. We also have a recorded video online of this, and we have a screen grab PDF. So folks have to go to their Fidelity Net Benefits accounts. They have to move their current investments, but just by moving 10% of what you currently have in there or 100% of what you currently have in there, that doesn't then mean you've shifted your future elections, which makes it kind of, so you want to say, I also want that much to go in the future. And then every account you have, and many people have multiple accounts in the UCRSP retirement savings, they have to repeat that. So I'm not going to go through these slides with you, but this is just to give you a sense of like what we did to prepare. So we are now very comfortable on the Fidelity Net Benefits website, and we often guide people through it step by step. Some folks are comfortable sharing their screen, and so I see how much money they have in there. I feel like a doctor. I can be like, I've seen all sizes, don't worry. But some people are not, and so I will just share mine. So you have to register as a new user. I mean, we've really gotten nitty gritty, right? Like here's the QR code where we can help you find your password for Fidelity Net Benefits if you don't have it. And then we just walk them through kind of screen grab by screen grab about how to sell one investment and buy another investment. So again, this is that radical, disobedient financial literacy that we were talking about. Then you have to shift the future ones. We show you how to do that. And then you have to repeat across each of your accounts, which have names like DCP and 403B. But right, always this language. And we're so familiar with this at the Debt Collective. Don't worry about it. There's so many ways to get help. Here's a pre-recorded video. Here's a PDF. Hannah will meet with you anytime. I can't tell you how many of my office hours I've spent meeting with people doing it. We also have a tutorial schedule up on the website. So I just wanted to kind of share that that's the level of hand-holding that we've done. And I think necessarily so, because most folks are not, we have found, especially folks who have the politics and the will to divest. The Venn diagram is small with the people who are very fluent in their pension plans. But even despite all of that infrastructure that I just said, it's like pulling teeth to get folks to do this. We held twice a week open Zoom tutorials and presentations. Maybe one person would come each time. That's why we then switched to seeing if we could go to faculty meetings. So people were kind of like already captive. And we would go, and in the room, there's like all of this enthusiasm, and people are so excited. But then obviously, I can't like step by step work through with different, it's not appropriate to like have people, it would seem like I was pressuring them to say, yes, I'm moving. So I always say, here is my email. I will help you move. Or if you want to have a follow-up session where 5 of you want to do it, nobody responds. We've been at this since September, last September, when school started in 2025. Again, it's a 10 campus system. We've gotten 200 people to do it. 200 people out of, oh, I love that you guys are clapping. That's like nothing. That's so far from 10%. And it is like, I mean, and think about the extraordinary, think about ourselves chanting, disclose, divest. How many people was I out there with chanting those things? And those people are like, oh, I haven't done it. There's fear, there's shame. These people, as we all are overextended. They're too busy. It's low on their priority list. So the organizing has been extraordinarily challenging, extraordinarily challenging. And so I just wanted to name that. And we're persisting. We're not going to stop. But that has been a real roadblock.
I really appreciate that
I'm interested in
point.
hearing
Go
more
ahead.
about that. I feel like that's like the heart of the matter. I mean, you need all the technical knowledge and the technical know-how that you guys have developed, which is super amazing. But it always gets back to that. Like the heart of the matter is how do we get people involved? Like, so it seems like you'd have to spend not just time developing the technical stuff, but you'd also have to spend time really thinking about why is this the case and how can
Yeah,
you even know? Because you're just really guessing. You're kind of in the dark about like why,
yeah,
right? I mean,
yeah.
it seems like you have to just put lots of time and energy into that as well.
Right. So I love this question. You may remember from the introduction that I'm actually an economic anthropologist. So this is literally my day job, right? Is to think and to talk about kind of, and what I do at the Debt Collective, what we all do at the Debt Collective, you don't need to be an econ anthro to think about this, right? Is like all of the, if I think about Shamel, all of the kind of embodied ways that finance makes us feel, whether it's our investments or our debts, all of the cultural norms around it. I think it is a lot easier. Wendy Brown has a nice little video on our Instagram where she says, if you're something like if your retirement invests where your mouth protests, right? So like it's hard to face our own complicities in life. It's hard to face our own contradictions. And all of us live inside capitalism. And some of us, like me, with a tenure track job and as these things go, a good retirement, it's easy for me to get out there and be like disclose, divest, but I'm one in a family of four and I'm going to have to support all of them with a pension. So like how to, but Audrey, to your question, the danger is for a group of academics, it's like we could do a study of why it is that it's, and yes, we could. That's like actually what we get paid for, and we may in fact do that. But it's trying to, so we have asked people, especially people who we know, and we are a disparate group. So asking folks who we have noticed have delayed, or folks whose politics we know, but we feel comfortable enough being like, hey, why haven't you done this? Most people are like, I'm just too busy, but I really plan on doing it. Some people are like, oh, I got to Fidelity, but I didn't have my password, and then I didn't have all the time to recover my password and dedicate. So there's lots of I'm too busy, I'll get to it in the summer. But the final thing I'll say on this is that what we have found works best, a surprise to no organizer on this call, is one-on-ones, right? So it used to be like, come to my office hours. Now I like write people who I know, and I'm like, when are your office hours? Can I come and talk to you about something to do with our pensions? I don't even say divestment, I don't say anything. And then I go and I talk to them a little bit about it. And if they're like, oh yeah, I'm in right away, then I'm like, let's log into Fidelity right now. But if not, they go on our warm list and we follow up with, I mean, we harass the shit out of people. And that, frankly, is what it takes. And I think mostly it's like fear of the interface. So many people are like, oh, if I press the wrong button, am I going to lose my whole retirement savings, right? Like real and also very irrational, but very real fear. Yeah, totally. Audrey. Yeah, I feel it. I mean, I don't feel that way anymore because I was part of this project, but that was me too before I started this project. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thomas has been putting some really interesting ideas in there about student involvement. I don't know, Thomas, if you want to say more about that, and maybe Hannah, you can say anything about have students, are they aware of this? Are they involved at all?
Yeah, Thomas, do you want to say it out loud and then I can respond?
Well, I feel reassured that the like smartest and kind of most intimidating people out there um, are just like me when it comes to looking at their own financial situation. Um, but yeah, I was wondering whether or not students are asking about this in class
Yeah.
or could be trained to help
Yeah.
do this.
I'm really glad that you
And
asked that.
I was
So my answer to this, interestingly, for those of us who have been around the Debt Collective for a while, and for those who haven't, I will give some details. When we first started the Debt Collective, we're like, we're going to organize students on campuses. And then we were like, oh, wait a minute. Students on campuses don't even really realize that they have student debt yet, and they're also somewhat transient. And now with Shamel and with Dr. B, like we're kind of returning to that in a much more studied and well thought out way. But interestingly, this works somewhat similarly. So while in my lifetime, the Palestine Solidarity encampments, where these big demands for disclosure and divestment were yesterday, most of those students have graduated. Most of the members of the divestment coalitions across the UC system are gone. And so there is not the urgency. So we still have a Students for Justice in Palestine, for example, though they have been banned from campus. So I shouldn't say that out loud, but of course they still exist, right? Part of the other problem is that very rightly, and maybe my profs can back me up here. I'm an old fuddy-duddy, and Occupy Wall Street to them is like an example of everything that you shouldn't do. And so they are very possessed, like they are the organizers. The students are the organizers, and we support them. Obviously, I'm a member of Faculty for Justice in Palestine. We support them. We do jail support for them. We do all of their disciplinary stuff for them. We were just selling merch for this big thing that they're doing. We do tons of stuff that just follows their organizing. But collaborating with them on divestment was very difficult because you have to kind of, they should take the lead, and rightly so. But that's when it gets to that strategic analysis, which is like, but it's our pension. And so it makes sense for there to be a faculty, a worker-led thing around the pension. So we have a whole like email template that's like email your, if your professor, is your professor teaching about ICE? Is your professor teaching about mass incarceration? Is your professor teaching about the Middle East right now? If so, send them this. But SJP is not, doesn't really want to send it. It's complicated. The politics of like student faculty because we're in power over them, you know, and I'm indebting them every day. So that those dynamics are challenging for sure. But we could do better. I think it's just like it's like a third rail. And so we were like, we just trying to get faculty together. And anybody who knows faculty is, oh my God, absurd.
Super, super helpful question though. I wanted to ask really quick, Hannah, what about the unions? Like, because you mentioned the staff too, right? Like,
Yes,
that seems like a captive audience.
100%. Yes, it's
Are
such a great
they?
question. Yeah.
Yeah. And
So
then,
that's been some of our main, and unsurprisingly, some of our main kind of targets. So our faculty are union, so the contingent faculty, right, the adjunct faculty are unionized in AFT, and our graduate students are unionized in UAW. Our librarians are also unionized in AFT, though a different unit. And so we have been presenting to them, but it's often, at least what we at UCLA and more broadly call, it's like rank and file organizers. It's very difficult to get union, especially right now, given what's going on in the University of California system, right? It's very difficult to get like the administrative caucus, which at UCLA is called union made, so like elected officials. It's very difficult to get their attention. But we've been working quite well with like some rank and file and some people who are elected. This is not us being partisan because I am very that is, I really try to work both with the electeds and with the rank and file all the time. And many of them are my graduate students, so that makes it easier. But so we've been starting to meet with them, and they are starting, the UAW is starting to kind of run their own campaign. And what we're hoping is that we can sync up at step two. Like, can we make enough noise and enough splash that the electeds get excited about it and they see that there's lots of kind of rank and file autonomous organizing around it so that it's step two when we demand a no state violence fund as just an option, we're just demanding the option and nothing more, that we could do it in step with UAW. AFT feels a little bit harder, but we've tried and lots of AFT members have moved, but we have more access in some ways to UAW because they are our graduate students. Whereas AFT, I mean, like there are a bunch of them in Faculty for Justice in Palestine, but they're, as is always the case, I mean, union work is so hard and so consuming, and this is not their number one priority, and I get that. But we're there. We're in communication. And I
thank
know
you.
Bruce has your hand up too.
Yep.
This may be totally pie in the sky, but could you get registered as like an authorized financial advisor option within the UC system and then not you personally, but like your organization, your group, or get existing ones to join up, and then you're not doing it alone, right?
Right. That's a really good question. And folks, like somebody who came to one of our most, we just did a presentation this past Friday, and a kind of like, what do you call those people? Like a microeconomist, like somebody who focuses on individual behavior. She was like, what about new faculty orientation? Like, could you get a spot on the right? This is kind of to your, but that would require some kind of sanction from the university. We are doing this completely publicly. Everything is above board. Everything also follows all of the Palestine exception rules that they've laid down because we wanted, right? We're like, I send it from my UCLA email address, right? I'm not sent, there's no Proton mail, there's no crypt pad. This is like out in the open. For a lot of people are so frightened around that as well, which maybe we could talk about. But so it qualifies, but I am not sure. I can't imagine the process of getting permission. I could see a kind of disorientation thing, but like, how can we get in? But like our med school colleagues, like some of the more lib people who do this with us, like the med school folks have presented at their DEI, what kind of is left of like DEI interested medical doctors. And they have, it's UCLA hospital. So it's like 500 of them in a Zoom. And so we've had some, and they move their money way more easily than anybody else because they're so fluent in the interfaces and are not afraid of finance, interestingly. It's a good anthropological insight into different communities. But so, yeah, I mean, I think we want to think about some of those choke points where, like, and how can it be? It's partially financial literacy, it's partially learning about your pension. A lot of us teach about state violence, we teach about incarceration, we teach about borders, we teach about militarization. Like, this is a way to kind of, show consistency or something. But so, it's a great idea to try to get certified or get official permission from the university. I'm not sure if you're located in a university, but the climate right now is somewhat difficult, as you might imagine.
See,
So
the
I don't
reason
know.
I ask is because my financial advisor that SUNY provides for free
Yeah.
is totally on board with this kind of stuff and is actually helping me do it.
That's interesting. So I wonder if we could also like reach out to Fidelity because we could like maybe we could talk to the financial advisors at Fidelity so that when they have someone who's like, "Hey, I'm interested in, divesting from ICE. I'm really concerned about Geo Group." They could be like, "Oh, there's actually a group of faculty members." That could be one way to do it, and that would allow us to bypass the UC administration, which is like a real shit show right now and doesn't like most of us. But yeah, it's a fantastic idea, and I appreciate it. Yeah, Julia.
No, turns out I don't understand faculty unions. Surprise. But the unions I've been a part of have have been given, like per the contract, a spot at orientation. But perhaps that's not true for faculty unions. That
So
was true in
one
the federal
important
government.
thing to note is that we are not unionized. I mean,
Oh,
AFT is unionized, but we ladder faculty are not unionized, although we are on a
okay.
drive for it right now. The only campus on which we, as UC faculty, ladder faculty are unionized is Santa Cruz, perhaps unsurprisingly. And so we are trying to unionize right now. But one of the things that's really interesting is that because the bargaining unit at UCLA and many of the big UCs is like primarily what we call South Campus, so STEM, right? It's like we have a huge science campus and a huge, so like divestment. I mean, notice divestment isn't even in our title. We are UC Move Your Money. But like, so the Faculty Association right now, in its drive to unionization, understandably is being very conservative because they already have a reputation of like being the crazy lefties on campus, even though they are the ones who restored all of our science funding. Our administration isn't trying. I mean, they've done such extraordinary things. We have done, but I haven't been in the lead there. So the faculty association is reluctant. We are like doing this on parallel tracks, and many of us at the center of this are also active in our faculty associations, but they are trying to maintain, like they're leading with science. Science all the way, which is great. I mean, we need to lead with science right now. There's nothing wrong with that. But we are a little bit of like a lefty liability to them right now, which I get.
And I am curious about the move your money. So, like in some states, including where I work, if you're a public employee and you're doing quote unquote divestment, you can be terminated, et cetera, right? So I do wonder legally how much that helps you. I don't know if that's a law in California or not, but the way that you phrase that, I wonder if it makes a difference for other people in other states about,
Sorry,
yeah,
like meaning if you're divesting in a way that is exceptional to it targeting Israel or Palestine, is that what you
yeah,
mean? That's illegal? Yeah.
yeah,
So that's illegal for us too. So the
yeah.
UC fact again, this is the kind of what's the word I used? Like hypocrisy, right? Yeah, I love that you're surprised by that. You should come to the UC system someday. So we have divested successfully from South Africa. So the rule that they put down is that you cannot single out countries.
Yeah.
But they didn't put that rule down until, the Palestine Solidarity Encampment. So we have successfully divested from South Africa, very famously, and we have successfully divested from Sudan, very famously. So it is deeply a Palestine exception thing. But when I was saying that this campaign hedges for institutional diversity, right? That's what I'm saying. So that's why we call this no state violence. And
Mm,
frankly, I would like to divest from the military industrial complex and from ICE. And I mean, every next day there's another reason for it to be state violence capaciously conceived that again includes Palestine, but is not specific to it. So that is one of the kind of strategic choices we made to get around that particular now
mhm.
rule in the UC system. The last thing I'll say is, of course, we have many Palestinian colleagues at UCLA and elsewhere who have come to this presentation, and they're like, you should take out Palestine altogether. You shouldn't even say Palestine
Wow, wow,
so that we get more people because
yeah,
people hear Palestine and then they think it's something that's not for them or that they're opposed to. Whereas if you say ICE, if you say incarceration, if you say militarization, people are like, oh, that's me, right? So it's like the interpolation of the liberal. We have been told by our Palestinian colleagues, sorry, now I'm being a professor, now I'm being Althusser, interpolate the liberal. But we are like, so for example, that UC encampment slide I showed you guys, I never show that. but it just felt important to acknowledge the work that our students had done and to note that their demands were financial demands largely, right? They were about disclosure and divestment. So, and that this takes up that call, but from faculty and in a more capacious frame.
Really appreciate the strategy there. Yeah. Um, I know you got a lot going on, Hannah. I know everyone
Got a
else has got
soccer
like,
practice to get to.
I know. So, if there's any other questions or comments, we will wrap this up. And I do want to just announce the next Jubilee School before we do that. Um, okay. I am so glad we have this recorded. This is just incredible work, and you're such a good teacher. You're
Thanks.
such a good public educator. I love it. I don't know if you all know this, but look up Debt Mom
Oh my
on
God,
YouTube.
Jason.
Go to YouTube and look up Debt Mom, and you will see some badass popular education from Hannah. So thank you so much. I do want to announce that our next College for All Jubilee School is really, really important. It is from Max Page, current but outgoing president of the Massachusetts Teacher Association, who's going to be talking about how they want to tax the rich in the state of Massachusetts, because we know that we need different revenue funds to do the things we want to do for the public. So Max Page will be talking about the successful Tax the Rich campaign from Massachusetts, and that's on June 18th. And that's in the chat right there. So please do join us for that. Spread the word. Any last things, Hannah, before we log off?
No, I don't think so. I was trying to convince my 8-year-old to come in and say hi, but I have failed.
Well,
He's
next
somewhere out
time.
there.
All right.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. And feel free to
Thank
email
you.
me, if you at Appel@ucla.edu. But you can find me wherever. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great.
All right,
Tony. Yes,
everyone.
all that. Yes.
Hang in there, everybody. Thank you so
Thank
much,
Thank
Hannah.
you
you.
so
Thanks,
much,
Jason. Thanks,
Hannah.
Julia. Thanks, Dr. B. Other Dr. B.
Yes.
Bye.
Ciao,
Okay,
ciao.
I forget that we're in the same space now, so I gotta call you.
Okay. I would
I'm in
love that. I would
LA.
love to see you.
Okay, love
Okay.
you.
Love
Great
you too.
job.
Bye.
Bye.
Ciao, everybody.